All right, guys, we're starting a new book by Thomas Mann called Death in Venice. On a spring afternoon in 19 blank, a year that had been glowing so ominously at our continent for months, Gustav Aschenbach, or von Aschenbach as he had been officially called since his 50th birthday, left his home on Prince Regent Street in Munich in order to take a rather long walk by himself. During this period, in particular, the difficult and debilitating work that he did every morning demanded utmost caution and prudence, urgency and precision from his willpower. But even after lunch, the rider, overwrought from his labor, had failed to halt the forward thrust of the engine producing inside him that modus animi continuus that Cicero views as the essence of eloquence, nor had Aschenbach managed to fall asleep even though he so badly needed his daily nap to counteract the growing depletion of his strength. And so shortly after tea he had sought the outdoors, hoping that fresh air and exercise would restore his energy so that he might enjoy a fruitful evening. It was early May, and after several cold and clammy weeks, a mock summer had set in. The English garden, though sprouting only tender leaves as yet, had been as muggy as in August, and the area near the city had been full of vehicles and strollers led by stiller and stiller paths to Almeister. Aschenbach had gazed briefly at the lively, crowded restaurant garden with the few hansoms and carriages parked at its edge. From there he had headed back at sunset, leaving the park and crossing the open meadows. I'm gonna modus animi continuous. So, feeling tired and noticing that a storm was brewing over Fall Ring, he went to North Cemetery, where he waited for the streetcar that would convey him straight back to town. I think he's in Germany. The trolley stopped and its surroundings happened to be deserted. No vehicle was in sight on Foringer Chaussee or on Ungerer Street, a paved avenue with lonesome, shiny tracks running toward Schwabing. Nothing stirred behind the fences of the stonecutters where the crosses, monuments, and commemorative tablets, all of them for sale, made up a second unintentional burial field. While across the road, the mortuary chapel, a Byzantine edifice, stood silently in the glow of the waning day. On the facade, which was decorated with Greek crosses and brightly colored hieratic designs, a few symmetrically arranged gold letters spelled out select inscriptions about the afterlife, such as "They are entering the dwelling of God," or "May light everlasting shine for them." For several minutes, Aschenbach had found an earnest distraction in reading those formulas and losing himself in the mysticism showing strength, or in the mysticism showing through. But then, upon surfacing from his reveries, he noticed a man standing in the portico above the two apocalyptic beasts guarding the stairs, which is with his not quite ordinary appearance. The man sent Aschenbach's thoughts in an entirely different direction. There was no telling whether the stranger had emerged from inside the chapel and through the bronze gates, or had inconspicuously mounted the steps from the outside. Aschenbach, without dwelling on the issue, leaned toward the former assumption. Medium in height, thin, beardless, and blatantly snub-nosed, the man was of the red-haired type and had its milky, freckled skin. He was obviously not of Bavarian stock. At the very least, a broad, straight-brimmed bast hat covering his head lent him the exotic look of someone from far away. Granted, the customary local rucksack was strapped to his shoulders, and his yellowish belted suit was apparently made of loden. A gray rain cape was slung over his left forearm, which was supported on his waist. In his right hand he held an iron-tipped stick, which was propped obliquely on the ground, and with crossed legs he braced his hip against the crook. His head was raised, exposing the strong, naked Adam's apple on his throat, which loomed gaunt from the loose sports shirt, while his colorless, red-lashed eyes gaped sharply into space, flanking two energetic vertical furrows, which strangely enough fitted in with his short, upturned nose. Because of all these features, and his heightened and heightening position may have contributed to this impression, he appeared to be surveying his surroundings, lording it over them boldly or even savagely, for whether he was grimacing because of the blinding sunset or because of some permanent physiognomical deformity, his lips seemed too short, they curled back completely, barring even the gums, so that the long white teeth glistened between them. Perhaps Aschenbach, half absently, half inquisitively, had shown a want of tact when scrutinizing the stranger, for suddenly he realized that the man was glaring back at him so directly and belligerently, so blatantly intent on having it out with him and forcing his retreat, that the rider squeamishly turned away and began walking along the fences, vaguely determined to pay the man no further heed. He had forgotten him a minute later. Now, whether Aschenbach's imagination was stirred by the stranger's air of wandering or by some other physical or mental influence, he quite surprisingly felt an expansion of his psyche, a kind of roving disquiet, a youthful craving and yearning for faraway places. And indeed, these sensations were so vivid, so novel, or at least so long outgrown and forgotten, that with his hands behind his back, his eyes on the ground, he halted, spellbound, trying to examine the essence and purpose of these emotions. It was wanderlust, nothing more, but it pounced on him as a seizure, intensifying into a burst of passion, even a hallucination. His desire could virtually see his ability to fantasize unlulled since his hours of working conjured up all the wonders and terrors, all the variety of the earth which he strove to envision. He saw a landscape, a tropical quagmire under a steamy sky, muggy, luxuriant, and monstrous, a primordial jungle of islands, morasses, and alluvial inlets, saw hairy palm shafts near and far striving upward out of rank and rampant ferns, realms of fat, swollen plants with fantastic blossoms, saw centrically misshapen trees plunging their roots through the air and into the ground, into stagnant waters reflecting green shadows, saw bowl-sized milky white flowers drifting on surfaces and outlandish species of birds, with hunched shoulders and deformed beaks standing in shallow liquids and inertly ogling sideways, saw the sparkling eyes of a crouching tiger between the knotty canes of the bamboo thicket, and he felt his heart pounding with horror and enigmatic longing. Then the vision faded, and shaking his head, Aschenbach resumed his promenade along the fences of the gravestone yards. By the time he had gained the wherewithal to enjoy the advantages of taking trips at will, he had started viewing travel as nothing but a health measure to be endured now and then, no matter what he might think or feel. Too preoccupied with the task that he himself and the European soul imposed on him, too overburdened by the obligation to produce, too averse to any distraction, he was no lover of the outer world and its rich variety, quite satisfied with whatever anyone can observe of the earth's surface, without stirring far from his immediate turf. He had never so much as been tempted to leave Europe. Now his life was slowly waning, and his fear of not completing his artistic mission, his concern that the clock might run down before he had done his bit and given fully of himself, could no longer be waved off as an idle quirk. His external life was therefore confined almost exclusively to the beautiful city that had become his home, and to the crude rustic cottage that he had built in the mountains and where he spent the rainy summers. So this sudden and tardy impulse was quickly restrained and rectified by his common sense and by the self-discipline he had been practicing since his youth. His intention had been to head for the country only after reaching a certain point in the work he lived for, and the thought of abandoning his labors for several months of globe-trotting seemed like an all too reckless disruption of his schedule. It was entirely out of the question and not to be taken seriously. And he knew only too well the source of this unexpected temptation. His yearning for new and faraway places, his desire for freedom, relief, and oblivion was, as he admitted to himself, an urge to flee, an urge to get away from his work, from the everyday sight of a cold, rigid, and passionate servitude. He certainly loved this servitude and almost loved the enervating conflict that recurred every day, the struggle between his proud, tenacious, so often tested willpower and this growing fatigue that no one must know about, that was not to betray the results in any way, with any hint of laxity or failure. Then again, it clearly made sense not to exaggerate, not to obstinately throttle such a vitally erupting need. He thought about his work, thought about the passage that he had once more been forced to abandon today like yesterday, since it would yield neither to patient application nor to surprise attack. He re-examined that passage, tried to smash through or dissolve his block, and with a shudder of repugnance he abandoned the assault. No extraordinary difficulty was involved. What paralyzed him were the scruples of his aversion, which manifested itself as an incapacity to satisfy his own insatiable demands. The adolescent, of course, had viewed his insatiability as the inmost nature, the very essence of talent, and because of these demands, he had reined in his feelings, letting them cool off, because he knew that emotion tends to be satisfied with cheerful approximation and less than perfection. Were his enslaved feelings now getting their revenge by deserting him, by refusing to carry his art any further or lend its wings, by taking along all his pleasure, all his delight in form and expression? Not that he was doing bad work. The advantage of his years was that he at least felt calm and certain about his mastery at every moment. But he himself, though his mastery was honored by the nation, was not happy with it. His work struck him as lacking those aspects of fiery and playful caprice, those products of joy which, more than any intrinsic substance, any weightier merit, brought joy to the savoring readership. He dreaded the summer in the country, where he would be alone in the small cottage with the maid who prepared his meals and the domestic who served them. He dreaded the familiar countenances of the mountain peaks and mountain walls that would again surround his sluggish dissatisfaction. And so he needed a breather, a change of air, some spontaneity, idleness, and new blood to make the summer endurable and fruitful. A trip, that would do it. Not too far, not all the way to the Tigers. A night in a sleeping car and a siesta of 3 or 4 weeks at some cosmopolitan resort in the charming South. Those were his reflections as the streetcar came rattling down Ungerer Street, and climbing aboard, he decided to spend the evening poring over maps and timetables. Standing on the trolley platform, he thought of looking for the man in the bast hat, his companion during that brief yet fertile recess, but Aschenbach was unable to determine his whereabouts, since the stranger was neither at his previous location nor farther down the stop, nor even inside the trolley. Aschenbach, so that's our guy right there. Aschenbach. Peace, y'all.